Okay, so we talked about ALARP and how it helps us try to balance safety and progress. But ALARP isn't the only tool that we have when we're assessing risk. And remember how we were talking about how risk acceptance isn't one size fits all? Well, different situations sometimes need different approaches. So let's say you're working on something completely new and innovative, like maybe a revolutionary new transportation system or some groundbreaking medical treatment. So how do you even begin to figure out how risky it is when there's nothing out there to even compare it to? Well, that's where a principle called GAMAB comes in. GAMAB. It stands for globally, at least as good. And it's all about making sure that whatever you're building is at least as safe as whatever the existing options are. So let's say, for example, you're developing self-driving cars. This is amazing technology, right? It has the potential to make our roads way safer. It could cut down on accidents caused by human error, but it also comes with its own risks. Like, what happens if the AI malfunctions? Or what if it makes the wrong decision in really complicated traffic situations? So with GAMAB, you would compare the risks of your self-driving car to the risks of regular human-driven car. You'd gather data on things like accident rates, types of collisions, and tons of other factors. And then you'd use all that information to make sure that your self-driving car is at least as safe as the cars that are already out there on the road. It's like setting a baseline for how safe it needs to be. It's like saying, hey, we're not just going to throw this new thing out into the world without making sure it's at least as safe as what people are already using. But it's not just about comparing apples to apples. Sometimes you also need to think about the bigger picture. What's the impact on society as a whole? So that's where a concept called MEM comes in, minimum endogenous mortality. Yeah, I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's actually a pretty straightforward idea. It's about making sure that new technologies or new systems don't end up increasing the overall risk to human life. So think about it like this. Every year, a certain number of people die. Accidents, illnesses, natural disasters, all kinds of things. That's what we call endogenous mortality. So MEM is about making sure that new technologies don't add to that number in a big way. So if you're building a nuclear power plant, for instance, you'd need to show that it wouldn't significantly increase the overall risk of people dying, even if the worst-case scenario happened. It's about making sure that the things we're creating are actually making the world safer, not more dangerous. I know this might sound a little bit heavy. All these principles, all these different ways of thinking about risk, it can feel kind of overwhelming. But here's the thing. Understanding these principles is like having a superpower. It lets you see past all the hype, all the noise, and ask the really important questions. So the next time you hear about some fancy new technology or a big project, or even just a change in safety regulations, you can use these principles to figure out what's really going on. You can ask, how are they actually assessing the risks? What principles are they using? Are they being upfront about the potential downsides? Are they taking everyone's concerns into account? And these are really powerful questions. They can help you make better decisions, both for yourself and for your community. But there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to talk about, and it's a concept that's both fascinating and really, really challenging: the value of human life. So how do we even start to put a price on something that's so precious? And how does that play into all of this when we're talking about what level of risk is acceptable? It's a question that's been around for a long time. Philosophers, economists, policymakers, they've all wrestled with it. How do you put a price tag on something that's essentially priceless? But here's the thing. We kind of have to, not literally, of course. We're not saying, okay, a human life is worth this many dollars. But we need some way to make rational decisions when lives are on the line. Because think about it. Every time we invest in safety features for cars, regulations for workplaces, disaster preparedness, all of that costs money. And at some point, we have to figure out how much we're willing to spend to potentially save a life. And I know this can be hard to hear. It feels wrong to even think about putting a value on a human life. But honestly, these kinds of calculations are happening all the time, even if we don't realize it. Look at healthcare. We have limited resources, so we have to make really difficult decisions about which treatments to cover, where to focus research, even how much we should spend on preventative care. And those decisions always come down to weighing costs and benefits. And yeah, that includes looking at the potential impact on people's lives. There are a bunch of ways to try and quantify the value of a human life. One way is to look at lost earnings or the economic impact of someone dying. Another way is to see how much people are willing to pay for things that reduce their risk of dying, like safety features or insurance. But we have to remember that these are just tools. They're not perfect. And there's no one right answer to the question of how much a human life is worth. And honestly, I think that's okay. We don't need to come up with an exact number. The point is to acknowledge that these trade-offs exist, and we need to make those decisions carefully and with as much compassion as possible. So how does all of this tie back to risk acceptance? Well, when we're deciding whether a certain level of risk is okay, we have to consider not just how likely it is to happen or how bad it could be. We also have to think about the potential impact on people's lives. And this isn't just about preventing deaths. It's also about things like quality of life, the long-term health impacts, even the emotional cost of trauma. It's about understanding that every decision we make, building a bridge, approving a new medicine, even how fast we drive our cars, all of that can have a huge impact on people's lives. So next time you hear about some risk assessment or some new safety regulation or a debate about the costs and benefits of some new technology, just remember, it's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. There are real stories behind those numbers, real people whose lives could be affected.
Risk acceptance isn't just some technical thing. It's a human thing. It's about using our knowledge, our values, our empathy to try to make the world a better place, a place where progress doesn't come at the expense of people's well-being. And I think that's something worth striving for. Keep asking the tough questions. Keep pushing for transparency and accountability. And always remember those human stories, because that's how we can make sure that progress actually benefits everyone. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I hope you learned something new today. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.